Officially, Project Blue Book case number 1007 Alpha, designation Travis, was closed with a 3-word conclusion: mass hysteria event. Those 3 words were a masterpiece of bureaucratic fiction, a bland and sterile epitaph for a horror that defied all language. I should know. I wrote them. Before we dive into the silence that has consumed my life for the better part of 50 years, a silence I'm about to shatter, I have a request. If you're here because you believe that not all stories have been told, that some truths are deliberately kept in the dark, make sure you're subscribed and have your notifications turned on. It's more important than you know. And do me a favor. In the comments, right now, answer me this. Do you believe there are things our own governments know that would break our understanding of the universe? Just a simple yes or no. It helps me to know I'm not shouting into the void. Now, let us begin. My name is Arthur Thompson, or at least, that was my name back then, in the fall of 1967, when I still believed in the inherent goodness of the American mission. I'm an old man now. My hands tremble, not from age, but from the memory of the weight of the files I was ordered to destroy. I live in a small, quiet house, 1,000 miles, and a lifetime away from the polished floors of Langley. The air here smells of pine and damp earth, a deliberate contrast to the scent I can never forget, the sterile, ozone-laced chill of the archives and the acrid smoke of burning paper. For decades, I have honored the oath of silence I took, not out of loyalty, but out of a profound and soul-crushing fear. Not fear of the men who enforce such oaths, but fear of the truth itself. Fear that giving it voice would somehow give it power again, that speaking its name would be like whispering an incantation. But silence is its own kind of prison, and my sentence has been long enough. What changed, you ask? A podcast. It's almost comical, isn't it? After all the threats, the sealed documents, the crushing weight of national security, it was a young man with a microphone talking about cold cases and paranormal curiosities that finally broke me. He was discussing Blue Book, rattling off the usual greatest hits: Roswell, Mantell, the Lubbock Lights. And then he said it. He mentioned a strange, unconfirmed rumor about a family in rural Oregon who disappeared for 3 days. He used the exact phrase we coined to bury it. A suspected mass hysteria event, likely triggered by local media reports on flying saucers. He said it so casually, so dismissively. He was quoting my lie, my contribution to the great silent conspiracy. And hearing it, 50 years later, spoken as historical fact, it was like a key turning in a lock deep inside my chest. The prison door swung open, and the ghosts came rushing out. So I sit here now, in my small study, with a single light casting long shadows on the walls. In front of me is a glass of whiskey I haven't touched and a microphone I bought this morning. And next to them, a single, worn manila folder. The one file I didn't burn. My sin. My proof. My confession. It's time to set the record straight. To tell you what really happened. It wasn't weather balloons. It wasn't swamp gas. It was never swamp gas. It was something else entirely. Something that came not to conquer us or to greet us, but to change us, to rewrite us. And the most terrifying part of all? In some cases, it was succeeding. My journey into the heart of the great lie didn't begin on a desert highway or a lonely country road. It began in the back of a stuffy, government-issue Chevrolet Bel Air, driving through the manicured suburbs of Northern Virginia in the humid summer of 1967. I was 24 years old, fresh out of Georgetown with a degree in political science and a head full of patriotic fervor. The Cold War was the great defining struggle of my generation, a battle of ideologies fought in the shadows, and I'd been recruited to be one of the Shadow Warriors. Or so I thought. My destination was a nondescript, brutalist concrete building known only as Annex C. It wasn't Langley, not the grand, imposing face of the agency you see in pictures. It was where they kept the projects that were too strange, too messy, or too embarrassing for the main campus. It was the CIA's attic, filled with dusty relics and quiet madmen. My guide through this gray labyrinth was a man named Frank Sullivan. He was everything I wasn't. Pushing 50, with a weary, cynical slump to his shoulders and a permanent faint aroma of stale coffee and disappointment clinging to his rumpled suit. He led me through endless corridors that all looked the same. Beige walls, polished linoleum floors, the air humming with the drone of ventilation. "Forget everything you think you know about intelligence, kid," Sullivan grunted, not bothering to look at me. "This isn't about saving the world. It's about managing perceptions. It's about crafting the narrative. Our job is to make sure the official story is the only story that sticks." He gestured vaguely at a closed door. "In there, we've got guys trying to teach dolphins to plant mines on Soviet subs. Down the hall, a team is running psychic viewing experiments on a Kremlin janitor's closet. And here," he stopped, pushing open a heavy door, "is where we keep the little green men." The room was a library of the absurd. Floor-to-ceiling shelves crammed with gray cardboard boxes, each stenciled with a number and a location. Project Blue Book. It wasn't an Air Force project, not really. The Air Force were the public face, the ones who sent out the majors to talk to hayseeds and reporters. The real analysis, the real files, the ones that came from sources other than a farmer with a new Kodak. Pilots, radar operators, our own assets. They ended up here, in our quiet, concrete purgatory. "Your job is simple, Arthur," Sullivan said, pulling a file from a box at random and dropping it on a small metal desk. "You are a professional debunker. You read the report. You find the hole. Was there a temperature inversion? Was the planet Venus at its brightest? Was there a nearby weather balloon station? Did the witness have a history of, shall we say, imaginative episodes?" He leaned in close, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Your job is to find the plausible, the mundane, the explanation that lets everyone go back to sleep. You are a professional purveyor of swamp gas." For the first few months, it was exactly that. A parade of grainy photos of lens flares, rambling accounts of seeing the Goodyear blimp after 6 beers, radar ghosts caused by migrating geese. I got good at it. I could debunk a sighting in under an hour, typing up my report with a smug sense of intellectual superiority. I was the rational man in a world of hysterics. Then, the first truly anomalous file landed on my desk. It wasn't from a civilian. It was a preliminary report from a listening post in Turkey, a place that didn't officially exist. A transcript of a communication between 2 Soviet MiG pilots over the Black Sea. The file was thin, just 3 pages of translated, heavily redacted transcript. The pilots were panicked. They were describing a third object, a silent dark triangle, pacing their jets, moving in ways that defied physics. It made no sound. It had no visible propulsion. It matched their speed, then accelerated to an impossible velocity and vanished. The final line of the transcript was from the Soviet flight controller, a single, stark order. "You will not speak of this again. To anyone. Acknowledge." I read it 3 times. This wasn't swamp gas. This wasn't Venus. This was trained military personnel, our enemies, reporting the same impossible things our own pilots were sometimes reporting. I took the file to Sullivan, my heart pounding with a sense of discovery. He glanced at the cover sheet, his face impassive. He didn't even open it. He took a long drag from his cigarette, blew a plume of smoke towards the ceiling and said, Atmospheric plasma, or a new Soviet electronic warfare prototype? Write it up as the latter. Sounds more threatening. Makes the boys at the Pentagon happy. He handed the file back to me. That was my first lesson. The truth was irrelevant. The only thing that mattered was the story. But it was that file, that dark triangle over the Black Sea, that planted the first seed of doubt in my mind. It was the first time I realized we weren't just managing public perception. We were actively managing our own. We were lying to ourselves. I wrote the report as ordered, but I didn't forget. I started a new folder, a personal one hidden in the bottom drawer of my desk. Its title was simple: Triangles. It was the first clue that I was on a road that led not to glory, but to a very dark and lonely place. A place where the monsters were real and my job was to pretend they weren't, even as their shadows fell over my desk. The true anomaly, the one that began the slow unraveling of my world, didn't announce itself with a crash or a flash of light. It arrived silently, in plain manila folders, one by one, over the course of the next year. They were a new category of report, trickling in from local law enforcement and field offices across the country. We labeled them disorientation events, a bland, clinical term for something deeply strange. These weren't just lights in the sky anymore. These were credible people. A school teacher in Wisconsin, a dentist in New Mexico, a commercial airline pilot from Colorado, found wandering, dazed, and confused in fields or on desolate roadsides. They were always missing time. 2 hours, 5 hours, sometimes an entire day, wiped clean from their memory as if it had never happened. The initial reports were easy enough to dismiss. Fugue states, undiagnosed neurological conditions, simple, if unfortunate, human frailties. I wrote the dismissals myself, filing them away under psychological, and tried not to think about them. But the files kept coming, and as I read them, a cold sense of unease began to creep over me. The details were too consistent. The discovery site was always rural, isolated. The subject was always found miles from their vehicle, which was often parked neatly on the side of a road, keys still in the ignition. And they always had the same story. They remembered driving, then nothing. Just a blank, terrifying void, followed by the slow, confusing return to awareness under a sky they didn't recognize. The official policy, dictated by my new superior, a prim and unnervingly calm man named Sterling, was to classify these as a subset of mass hysteria. The theory was that the growing media frenzy around UFOs was planting ideas in suggestible minds, creating a kind of psychological contagion. It made a certain cold sense, and for a while, I clung to it. It was my job too. But in the quiet hum of the archives, late at night when everyone else had gone home, I started my real work. I took my secret triangles folder and renamed it The Pattern. I bought a large map of the United States and pinned it to the wall of my small apartment. Every time a new disorientation event came in, I marked the location with a red pin. Slowly, a picture began to emerge. The pins weren't random. They formed distinct clusters, often near military bases, power plants, or sites of geological significance. A cold, methodical logic seemed to be at play. Then I found the first physical link. It was buried deep in a medical report attached to the file of the Wisconsin school teacher. A small note from the examining physician, almost an afterthought. Subject presents with a small second-degree burn on the dorsal side of her left wrist. Equilateral triangle in shape, approximately 1 centimeter per side. Subject has no memory of receiving the injury. My blood ran cold. I spent the next 3 weeks requisitioning the full medical records for every disorientation case in our files. It was a bureaucratic nightmare, but I persisted. And there it was, in nearly 70% of the cases. A small, triangular burn. Sometimes on the wrist, sometimes on the back of the neck, sometimes behind the ear. Always precise. Always unexplained. This wasn't hysteria. Hysteria doesn't leave identical scars on people 1,000 miles apart. This was a procedure. A calling card. I presented my findings to Sterling, my hands shaking slightly as I laid the files and the map out on his vast, empty desk. He listened patiently, his fingers steepled, his face a mask of polite interest. He examined the photographs of the burns. He looked at my map. When I was finished, he nodded slowly. "Excellent work, Arthur," he said, his voice as smooth as polished marble. "This is a fascinating example of mimetic transference. Clearly, a description of this mark has entered the public consciousness through some unknown channel, and suggestible individuals are manifesting it psychosomatically. Stigmata for the space age." He was explaining it away. He was admiring my work and identifying the pattern, only to dismiss the pattern itself as part of the delusion. It was a stunning, breathtaking piece of intellectual gymnastics. He ordered me to compile my findings into a single report, classified Omega level, and then to cease this line of inquiry. The message was clear. "You've found something you shouldn't have. Now put it back in the box and close the lid." But it was too late. My faith in the institution was shattered. That night, I broke protocol. I accessed the audio archive, looking for the hypnosis session transcripts that were sometimes included in the files. I found one, for the dentist in New Mexico. I threaded the reel-to-reel tape in a secluded listening booth, the big headphones swallowing my ears, shutting out the world. I heard the calm, droning voice of the hypnotist regressing the man back to the period of missing time. The dentist's voice was tense, frightened. He described driving on a dark highway, a bright light, his car losing power. And then, silence. The hypnotist pushed him. "What do you see?" he asked. The dentist started breathing heavily. "The light. It's not a light. It's a place. I'm not in my car. I'm in a room. It's wrong. The corners are wrong." His voice dropped to a terrified whisper. "They're here." The hypnotist asked who they were. The dentist was silent for a full minute. Then he let out a choked sob. "I can't. The symbol. I have to. I have to show you." The transcript noted that the subject, despite being in a deep trance, sat up, took the pen and notepad from the hypnotist, and began to draw. I frantically searched the case file. Tucked into a sleeve in the back, I found a faded photograph of a piece of notepaper. On it was a drawing. It wasn't a saucer. It wasn't a little green man. It was a shape. A complex, utterly alien geometric design. A mix of sharp angles and impossible curves that seemed to twist and fold in on itself. It was intricate, precise, and utterly meaningless to me. But as I stared at it, a wave of profound, primal dread washed over me. My mind recoiled from it. It felt like looking at something my brain was not designed to process. This was the true beginning. The burn was the physical sign. But the symbol was the key. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that my life would never be the same. I had just peered through the keyhole of a door that was never meant to be opened. The night I found the first drawing of the symbol marked a turning point. The quiet unease that had been my constant companion for months curdled into a living, breathing paranoia. The fluorescent hum of the archives no longer sounded benign. It felt like a whisper just below the threshold of hearing. The rustle of paper in a distant office was no longer just paper. It was a file being opened, a report being written about me. I began to see Sterling everywhere. A glimpse of his perfectly tailored suit at the end of a long corridor, his reflection in the glass of the cafeteria, the sound of his measured, confident footsteps seeming to follow me. I told myself I was being ridiculous. It was the late hours, the stress, the bizarre nature of the material. I was the rational man, the debunker. I tried to debunk my own growing fear. The symbol, I reasoned, was a fluke. The dentist was an amateur artist with an overactive imagination. The hypnotist had inadvertently led him. There were 100 logical explanations, but my attempts at self-reassurance were like building a sandcastle against a rising tide. The tide always won. A week later, the tide came in the form of a file from a cattle rancher in rural Nebraska. Another disorientation event. Another triangular burn, this time on the back of his neck. Another hypnosis session. And another drawing. I felt a tremor of sick anticipation as I searched the file. There it was. A photograph of another drawing, on another piece of paper, made by another man 1,000 miles away from the first. It was identical. Not similar. Not close. Identical. Every line, every curve, every impossible angle reproduced with the precision of a machine. My carefully constructed sandcastle of denial was washed away in an instant. This was not coincidence. This was communication. Or replication. I didn't know which was more terrifying. I photocopied both drawings and pinned them side by side on the wall of my apartment, next to the map with its growing clusters of red pins. They stared back at me. Two silent, alien, screaming faces. For the first time, I felt a genuine physical fear of my work. This wasn't a state secret. This wasn't a Cold War game of cat and mouse. This was something else. Something ancient and vast and utterly indifferent to our petty human struggles. I started working almost exclusively at night, using the time to cross-reference every file I could get my hands on, searching for any mention of symbols or drawings. I found 2 more. A housewife in Arizona. A long-haul truck driver in Pennsylvania. 4 drawings, all identical. The pattern was undeniable. A silent network of shared trauma stretching across the country. And I was the only one who seemed to see it. The paranoia intensified. I started triple-checking the locks on my apartment door. I would sit in silence for hours, just listening. Every creak of the floorboards in the apartment above was a footstep. Every car that slowed down on the street outside was watching me. The world had become a hostile, listening place. The definitive moment, the one that proved my fears were not just in my head, came on a Tuesday morning. I was at my desk, trying to look busy with a stack of mundane sighting reports, my secret research hidden in my locked drawer. Sterling appeared at the end of my aisle. He didn't walk towards me with his usual confident stride. He ambled, pausing to chat with another analyst, pretending to examine a wall chart. But I could feel his attention on me like a physical weight. He was a predator circling its prey. And I was frozen, pretending to be just another herbivore in the herd. He eventually made his way to my desk, leaning against the filing cabinet next to it, feigning a casual air that was more menacing than any open threat. "Anything interesting today, Arthur?" he asked, his eyes scanning the papers on my desk. "Just the usual, sir," I stammered, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. "Reports of a glowing weather balloon over Ohio." Weather balloons," he said with a thin, knowing smile. So often misunderstood. His gaze drifted from my desk to the trash can beside it. In it, on top of some crumpled paper, was a failed photocopy of one of the symbols, which I had hastily discarded that morning. His eyes lingered on it for just a fraction of a second too long. It was a glance that lasted no more than a heartbeat, but it was filled with a universe of meaning. He knew. I don't know how, but he knew exactly what I was looking for. He saw the corner of my secret world, and in that instant, I saw the truth in his eyes. He wasn't just my superior. He was my warden. His job wasn't to manage the project. It was to manage me. He gave another bloodless smile, pushed himself off the cabinet and said, carry on. Then he walked away, leaving me in a state of cold, electric shock. The feeling was no longer just paranoia. It was certainty. The footprint was there. My investigation was no longer a secret. I was no longer just an analyst. I was a liability, and the men I worked for were not on my side. They were the keepers of the silence, and I was making too much noise. Sterling's silent warning was the starting gun for a new, desperate phase of my investigation. The game had changed. I was no longer a curious researcher. I was a hunted man, working against a clock I couldn't see. The open paranoia of the previous week solidified into a cold, methodical caution. I became a ghost within the machine. I did the work I was assigned during the day with feigned diligence, writing my bland reports on swamp gas and Venus, becoming the very model of a compliant, incurious analyst. But my real work happened in the margins, in the stolen moments, in the dead of night. I communicated in code, even in my own notes. The symbol became the blueprint. The abductees were the students. The triangular burn was the graduation mark. It felt like playing a spy in my own life. I started using back channels, calling in favors from clerks in different departments, requisitioning files that were tangentially related to my search, hoping to find clues without raising a direct flag. I was looking for the nexus, the patient zero, the one case that was different from all the others, the one that might hold the key. The near misses became a daily occurrence. I'd return to my desk to find my chair move slightly. A file I knew I had left on the left side of my desk would be on the right. Once, I found a single, long, gray hair, Sterling's exact color, on my blotter. They were little messages, little reminders that my cage had no walls, but was always there. I was being watched, my every move scrutinized. The pressure was immense, a constant low-grade terror that frayed my nerves raw. My search, this desperate secret hunt, led me to stories of a special archive, a place whispered about by the older analysts, called the Omega Vault. It was where they kept the cases that were too radioactive even for Annex C, the cases that had no plausible deniability, the ones that broke the rules. Getting access was supposed to be impossible. It required a sign-off from the director himself. But I found a loophole. A terrified, mousy clerk in records management named Peters, a man I had once helped out of a jam involving a misfiled report and a bottle of bourbon. I cornered him in the parking garage one evening. I didn't threaten him. I just laid out a few of the facts, the burn marks, the symbols, the consistency. I showed him a flash of the terror that lived in my own heart, and he recognized it. He saw that I wasn't a crank. I was a man who had stumbled into a very dark room and was just trying to find the light switch. He was terrified, but his curiosity, or perhaps his own buried conscience, won out. He told me about a single master file, the one they had built all the protocols to contain. Case number 1007 Alpha, the Travis case. It wasn't in the Omega Vault. It was held separately, in Sterling's own office safe. The next part was the most dangerous thing I'd ever done in my life. Using Peters' knowledge of security schedules, I planned my move for a night when Sterling was scheduled to be in a marathon briefing at the Pentagon. Peters, his hands shaking so badly he could barely handle the keys, let me into the main administrative suite. The silence in the halls was different that night. It wasn't empty. It was heavy, expectant. We bypassed the main lock on Sterling's office using a code Peters had overlooked during a system update. His office was as immaculate and soulless as the man himself. And there it was, a huge, black Mosler safe, squatting in the corner like a metal gargoyle. The combination was the true barrier. But I had a hunch, a desperate, insane long shot based on my study of the man. Sterling was a creature of ego and order. I tried his date of entry to the agency. Nothing. I tried his service number. Nothing. Then I remembered the Omega classification he had assigned my report, the highest level of secrecy. I pictured him, this man who saw himself as a guardian at the final gate of knowledge. And I tried the date, August 6th, 1945, the day we dropped the bomb on Hiroshima, the day the world changed forever. The lock clicked open. My heart hammered in my chest. Inside there was only one thing. Not a box, not a binder. A single, absurdly thick, dark red file jacket bound with a fabric tie. It felt strangely warm to the touch. I didn't have time to read it there. I took it, replacing it with a dummy file of the same size I had prepared. We reset the locks, wiped our tracks, and I fled into the night, the file a cancerous weight under my coat. Back in the sanctuary of my locked apartment, I laid it on my kitchen table. The label was stark, typewritten. Travis, D. et al., Project Blue Bookcase, 1007A. Omega clearance only. Do not duplicate. Eyes only. Sterling. I untied the ribbon. The first thing I saw inside wasn't a report. It was an 8x10 glossy photograph, contained in a clear plastic sleeve. It was a picture of the rear window of a dusty family station wagon. The photo was taken at night, illuminated by a harsh flash, and on the glass, drawn in the thick dust from the inside, were 4 perfect, intricate renderings of the symbol. Underneath them, a smaller 5th symbol, drawn with the unmistakable shakiness of a child's hand. And the first line of the attached summary report, a line that would become the anthem of my nightmares for the next 50 years, read, "Family of 4 recovered after 72 hours near Mount Hood, Oregon. Subjects are physically unharmed, conscious and alert. However, all subjects are non-communicative and appear to have lost the ability to produce or comprehend spoken or written language in any form." The Travis case file was not a report. It was a tomb. It was the detailed clinical autopsy of a family's minds. I spent the entire night and then the next day locked in my apartment, chain-smoking cigarettes and drinking black coffee, poring over every page. The world outside ceased to exist. There was only the file, a universe of horror contained within a red cardboard jacket. The initial police report from a sheriff's deputy in rural Oregon was chilling in its simplicity. He'd found the family's Ford Country Squire station wagon parked on a disused logging road. The engine was cold, the doors were unlocked. A half-eaten bag of potato chips was on the front seat. It looked like the family had just stepped out for a walk and never came back. 3 days later, another deputy found them, huddled together in the back of the car, which was now locked from the inside. They were David and Sarah Travis, both in their late 30s, and their 2 children, 10-year-old Michael and 6-year-old Jessica. They were physically fine, a little dehydrated but otherwise unharmed. But they wouldn't speak. They just stared at the deputies with wide, placid eyes, a look of profound and unnerving serenity on their faces. The file contained the full medical workups. Our people, the agency's quiet physicians, had been flown in within hours, superseding local authorities. Every test imaginable was run. Brain scans, blood work, spinal taps. Nothing. Physically, the Travis family was in perfect health. They all had the telltale triangular burn on their wrists, a detail noted and then immediately buried in a classified addendum. The real horror was in the psychological evaluations. I read transcripts of dozens of interviews. The best psychiatrists and linguists the government could secretly procure were brought in to try and break through the silence. They tried everything. Friendly conversation, stern commands, written questions, pictures. Nothing elicited a response. The family would sit, calm and patient, and simply look at the questioner, a faint, almost pitying smile on their faces. They weren't catatonic. They were responsive. They would eat when food was given. They would use the bathroom. They would even play with blocks if they were provided. But language, the cornerstone of human consciousness, was gone. Erased. Then I got to the section on the humming. It had started on the second day of their observation at the secret medical facility. First the father, David, then the mother, and the son, and finally, little Jessica. They would start humming. It wasn't a recognizable tune. It was a complex, meandering, and utterly non-repeating melody. It was a tonal, filled with microtonal shifts that our Western scale couldn't account for. The file contained a thick sheaf of musical notation, the work of a frantic musicologist from Juilliard who had been brought in. His notes in the margins were terrifying. "The melodic structure is recursive but never cyclical," he wrote. "It appears to be a form of auditory fractal. Mathematically, it should be impossible for a human mind to generate, let alone memorize and reproduce. They are not humming a song. They are performing a calculation." As I read this, the memory of the humming on the hypnotist tape from the New Mexico case slammed into me. The farmer who drew the symbol, he had hummed too. It was the same phenomenon. I felt a wave of nausea. This was a system, a process. The burn, the symbol, the humming. It was a terrible alien catechism. The final and most disturbing section of the file was an addendum from a DARPA linguist, a brilliant but eccentric man named Dr. Alistair Finch. He had been given access to the family for 1 week. His conclusions were what elevated the Travis case to Omega level. Finch's theory was explosive. He argued that we were witnessing not a loss of language, but a replacement, a software update for the human brain. "The subjects have not forgotten English," Finch wrote in his final, terrifying summary. "Their cognitive framework has been overwritten with a new, more efficient operating system. A language based not on phonemes and syntax, but on the direct transmission of geometric and sonic data. The symbol is not a picture of a thing. It is the thing itself, a compressed data packet. The humming is not a melody. It is the algorithm that unpacks it. We are not dealing with amnesia. We are dealing with a successful conversion. They are no longer simply human. They have been upgraded. And the most frightening part is, from their placid demeanor, I believe they are perfectly happy with the arrangement." I had to stand up. I paced my small apartment like a caged animal. An upgrade, a conversion. The cold, clinical words were more terrifying than any monster story. This wasn't an attack. It was a gift. A terrible, soul-destroying gift that erased the recipient. This was the truth Sterling had tried to bury. The truth that humanity was not just being observed, but actively edited. The cliffhanger, the final nail in the coffin of my sanity, was the last page of Finch's report. It was a speculative analysis, a thought experiment. He wrote, "The efficiency of this symbolic sonic language is theoretically infinite. One could, in theory, transmit the entire contents of the Library of Congress in a single symbol and a 3-minute melody. But what is its purpose? It is my belief that it is a colonization vector, not of a planet, but of a consciousness. It spreads like a virus. Once a mind is rewritten, it becomes a broadcaster, capable of transmitting the language to others. The Travis family is no longer a family. They are a broadcast antenna waiting for a receiver, and we have no idea who or what is listening to their song." I dropped the file on the floor. My hands were slick with sweat. The humming, the symbols. It was a virus, a psychic plague. And I'd spent the last year collecting its scattered spores, gathering them all in one place. My apartment was no longer a sanctuary. It was ground zero. After reading Alistair Finch's report, the world took on a new, terrifying texture. The entity I was investigating was no longer a vague external threat in the sky. It was a contagion, and the bureaucracy I served, personified by the cold, calm visage of Sterling, was no longer just a body of secrets, but a quarantine protocol. The psychological war began in earnest, but the enemy wasn't the alien teacher. It was my own mind, and the relentless pressure applied by the system I was trapped within. Sterling called me into his office the day after I returned the Travis file. The dummy file sat in his safe, a silent testament to my crime. He didn't mention it. He didn't have to. The war was one of subtlety, of inflicting psychological death by 1,000 paper cuts. My internal baggage, my naive patriotism, and my belief that we were the good guys became the weapon he used against me. He started by praising my work on the mass hysteria angle. "You have a gift for clarity, Arthur," he said, his voice dripping with a sincerity that felt like acid. "A real talent for cutting through the noise and finding the simple, reassuring truth. It's a vital service to this nation's stability." He was congratulating me for my lies, framing my complicity as a patriotic duty. It was a masterstroke of manipulation, making me feel simultaneously proud and deeply ashamed. Then came the isolation. He reassigned me. My new task was to review decades of Soviet agricultural reports, searching for evidence of crop failures they might be hiding. It was a monumental, soul-crushingly boring task designed to do one thing: bury me in useless data, keeping me far away from Blue Book and the archives. My colleagues, picking up on the subtle cues from Sterling, began to avoid me. Conversations would stop when I entered a room. Lunch invitations dried up. I was a pariah, a man under a quiet cloud of suspicion. The silence of my empty apartment became a roaring abyss of self-doubt. Was Finch right? Was I? Or was Sterling's version the truth? Was I just a neurotic, paranoid analyst seeing patterns in the static, building a grand conspiracy out of coincidence and psychosomatic suggestion? The entity, the real one, the one made of fear and doubt, began its assault. I started having waking nightmares. I'd be reading a Soviet grain yield report, and the numbers would dissolve and reform into the symbol. I'd hear a faint, atonal humming under the sound of the air conditioner, the Travis family's impossible melody. I was reliving my greatest failure, not a past one, but the one I was committing in the present. My failure to act. The worst was when Sterling used my own past against me. My father was a decorated soldier, a hero at Normandy who came home and drank himself into an early grave, tormented by what he'd seen. I had told Sterling about him once, in a moment of naive openness when I was first recruited. Sterling called me in for another chat. He spoke about the burdens of knowledge, the things a soldier and an intelligence officer see that they can't unsee. He talked about the importance of mental fortitude, of compartmentalization. "Some men break under the strain, Arthur," he said, looking at me with what looked like pity, but felt like a threat. "They see monsters in every shadow. They lose the ability to distinguish between the real threat and the phantoms in their own minds. We can't afford to have men like that in sensitive positions. Their patriotism becomes a liability." He was telling me I was becoming my father. He was using the deepest wound of my life to tell me I was crazy, unstable, and a threat to national security. The line between what was real and what was a manipulation completely dissolved. Was the humming real, or was I imagining it? Was Sterling a monster, or was he a patriot trying to manage a weak link? The entity of the system was trying to break me, to make me doubt my own sanity so profoundly that I would discredit myself. The final, crushing blow came a week later. Sterling gave me a direct order. It was the culmination of his entire campaign. "The Air Force is officially concluding Project Blue Book next year," he said, his voice final. The determination is that there is no evidence of extraterrestrial craft or threat to national security. Before that happens, we are performing a final records consolidation. You, Arthur, will personally write the summary report for the disorientation event subcategory. Your conclusion, as we've discussed, will be mass hysteria amplified by popular media. Once that report is filed, you will oversee the physical incineration of all related case files, the originals, the hypnosis tapes, the photographs, all of it. We are closing the book, for good. I stared at him, my mind reeling. He wasn't just asking me to write the lie. He was ordering me to be the executioner of the truth. It was a monstrous, perfect trap. If I refused, I'd be confirming my insubordination and instability, and I'd be removed, the files destroyed anyway. If I agreed, I would become the ultimate tool of the cover-up, my own hands pushing the evidence of humanity's most profound discovery into the fire. I saw my father's ghost in the reflection on Sterling's polished desk. I saw the placid, smiling faces of the Travis family. I heard the impossible, unending hum. And in that moment, broken and utterly defeated by a war I didn't even know I was fighting, I made my catastrophic mistake. I surrendered. "Yes, sir," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "I understand. I'll take care of it." I had thrown the lever. I'd broken the seal. The screaming that followed would be my own, and it would last for the next 50 years. The point of no return wasn't a single moment, but a slow, methodical descent over the course of a week. The immediate consequence of my surrender to Sterling was a chillingly profound sense of emptiness. The psychological war was over, and I had lost. The system, the quiet, immense, gray machine, had won. It had successfully diagnosed my curiosity as a disease and had prescribed the perfect cure to make me the instrument of my own disillusionment. The preparations for the burning were a surreal exercise in bureaucratic horror. I spent days in the archives, going through the files one last time, not as an investigator, but as an undertaker. I had to sign a series of forms for each box, a chain of custody that would end at the incinerator in the sub-basement. Each signature felt like a betrayal. The air in the archive, which had once crackled with secrets and discovery, was now thick with the silence of a tomb. The files themselves seemed to mock me. I saw the photo of the triangular burn on the Wisconsin teacher's wrist. I saw the intricate, maddening symbol drawn by the New Mexico dentist. I held the reel-to-reel tapes of the hypnosis sessions, the captured echoes of terror and transformation, and my job was to tag them all for destruction. The true disaster, the breach of the final containment wall within my own soul, happened on the final day. The last file to be processed was the big one, Case 1007 Alpha, the Travis file. I opened the red jacket, and the placid faces of the family stared up at me from the photographs. David, Sarah, Michael, and little Jessica. They weren't just a case number anymore. I knew them. I had lived in their silence for months. I saw the photo of the symbols drawn on the dusty car window. I read Alistair Finch's final terrible warning. They are a broadcast antenna. And I was about to destroy the only proof that the broadcast had ever been received. For a moment, a surge of rebellion, of pure, righteous fury, coursed through me. I could run. I could take this file and disappear. I could leak it to the press. But the system had anticipated that. I knew with absolute certainty that I would never make it out of the building. I was being watched. My every move was choreographed. I was a puppet in a play that had been written long before I joined the cast. And so, with a sense of finality that felt like a physical death, I signed the last form. The overt physical aggression came not from an alien entity, but from the simple, brutal mechanics of my task. I personally loaded the boxes onto a heavy metal cart. I pushed the cart through the silent, echoing corridors of the annex, down to the service elevator, and into the stifling heat of the sub-basement. The air down there was thick with the smell of hot metal and burned secrets. The incinerator was a massive, brick-lined beast, its iron door a gaping maw. A silent, grim-faced technician in overalls stood by, waiting for my signal. This was it. The final act. I opened the first box. It was filled with the early disorientation cases. I took the files, stacks of them, and tossed them into the darkness. Then the next box, containing the photos of the burns. They felt like family portraits as I condemned them to the fire. Then came the box of hypnosis tapes, the recorded voices of terrified people, the humming, the captured echoes of the new language. All of it fed to the flames. My direct, violent encounter was with the Travis file. I held it in my hands, the last piece of the puzzle. I could hear the phantom humming in my ears, a high, thin sound that seemed to emanate from the file itself. I saw the symbol seared onto the inside of my eyelids. I thought of Alistair Finch's warning. I thought of the family locked away somewhere in a government facility, humming their endless, serene, alien song. And I threw it in. I watched as the flames licked at the red jacket, curling the edges, turning the photographs to black ash, melting the plastic reels of tape into grotesque shapes. I was burning the evidence. I was burning the truth. I was burning a part of my own soul. The technician, without a word, slammed the heavy iron door shut and threw the lever. The roar of the gas jets intensified, a hungry, deafening sound. It was over. Everything was gone. As I stood there bathed in the heat and the roar, a profound despair washed over me. I had failed. I had been a coward. I had served the monsters of silence. But in that moment of absolute hopelessness, something else crystallized in the pit of my stomach. A single, cold, hard shard of defiance. As I had been sorting the tapes for destruction, one of them, the very first one I'd ever listened to, the New Mexico dentist, the first drawing, had fallen from its box onto the floor. In the frantic, soul-crushing haze of my task, on pure, unthinking impulse, I had kicked it under the edge of a shelving unit instead of picking it up. It was a tiny act of rebellion, a subconscious preservation of a single fragment. Now, as the last of the Travis file turned to smoke, that impulse transformed into a conscious, desperate plan. They had ordered me to burn it all. And I had. Almost. The incinerator's roar was the sound of my old life ending. But the silence that followed was the beginning of a new one. I wasn't an analyst anymore. I was a keeper of a single stolen echo. And I knew, standing there in the heat and the dark, that I had to go back. I had to retrieve that one last piece. I wasn't just going to run. I was going to carry a piece of the truth out of this tomb with me, no matter the cost. The journey back up from the sub-basement was a disorienting ascent from hell. The roar of the incinerator faded behind me, replaced by the humming of the fluorescent lights in the empty corridors, a sound that now seemed to mimic the melody I had just tried to erase from the world. My mind was a strange cocktail of profound guilt and a new, razor-sharp sense of purpose. I was no longer just a pawn. My single, impulsive act of defiance, kicking that tape aside, had turned me into a player again, albeit in a game where the stakes were my own life and sanity. My desperate preparation for this final, desperate act was entirely internal. I couldn't gather weapons or tools. My only weapon was my knowledge of the building's routines. My only tool, the cloak of invisibility I had cultivated as a meek, compliant analyst. I had to get back to the archive room where I'd sorted the tapes, retrieve the one I had hidden, and get out of the building with it. It sounded simple. It was the most dangerous thing I could possibly do. The journey to the lair, the archive room that now felt like the heart of the beast, was a terrifying gauntlet of my own paranoia. Every shadow seemed to hold the silhouette of Sterling. Every distant phone ring was a security alert. The very architecture of the building, once so familiar, now felt hostile and surreal. The long, straight corridors seemed to stretch to impossible lengths. The familiar faces of the late-night cleaning crew looked at me with what I perceived as suspicion. I was a foreign body in the bloodstream of the system, and I could feel the antibodies beginning to swarm. I reached the archive room. The door was unlocked. I slipped inside, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The room was just as I'd left it. Empty boxes, stray bits of paper, the ghost of my great betrayal hanging heavy in the air. I walked to the shelving unit, my steps deafening in the silence. I knelt down, my hands trembling. The final guardian, the last obstacle, wasn't a monster or a locked door. It was a simple, terrifying puzzle of timing and luck. Just as my fingers brushed against the cool plastic of the reel-to-reel tape box, I heard them. Footsteps. Slow, measured, confident footsteps coming down the corridor. Sterling's footsteps. There was nowhere to hide. The room was a box. My mind raced, sifting through a dozen insane suicidal plans. But then, a piece of knowledge from the central artifact, my time as an analyst, my professional training, gave me the solution. I knew the night shift security guard, a portly man named Henderson, did his rounds at precisely 2:30 in the morning, and I knew he always started on the top floor and worked his way down. Sterling, a creature of habit and control, would never allow himself to be seen by a lowly guard after hours. He would wait. I had a window, maybe 30 seconds. I snatched the tape, my fingers closing around it like a talisman. I didn't run for the door. Instead, I went to the large, wheeled trash receptacle in the corner, the one used by the cleaning crew. I lifted the plastic liner, placed the tape at the very bottom, and covered it with the crumpled papers and other refuse from my earlier sorting. I smoothed the liner back into place just as Sterling pushed the door open. He stood there, silhouetted in the hallway light. He didn't look surprised to see me. He looked expectant. "Leaving so soon, Arthur?" he asked, his voice calm and deadly. "I was just making sure everything was properly disposed of," I stammered, my voice sounding thin and weak. He took a step into the room, his eyes scanning every inch of it. They were the eyes of a hunter, looking for any sign of a struggle, any misplaced object. They swept over the empty shelves, the stacked boxes, my face. And then they settled on the trash can. For a horrifying second, I was sure he knew, that he could smell the truth hidden beneath the garbage. But he was looking for a file, a folder, something I would carry. The trash was beneath his notice. He held my gaze for a long, agonizing moment, a silent battle of wills fought in the humming quiet of the archive. Then he gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "Good," he said. "A clean slate. For everyone." He turned and walked away, his footsteps receding down the hall. I waited, not daring to breathe until the sound was completely gone. I had survived. The final puzzle was solved. Now, for the final act. Getting my treasure out of the building. I knew the cleaning crew would wheel that trash can down to the loading dock to be trucked to an off-site dump in the morning. I now had a new mission. I wasn't going home. I was going to the loading dock. I was going to wait all night if I had to. I opened the door to the archive and stepped out into the hallway. The air that hit me felt different. It was the air of a world I no longer belonged to. The air of a man who had just stolen fire from the gods. And what I held in my mind, the knowledge of the tape at the bottom of that bin, God. No report, no incinerator could ever burn away the horror of what I now had to do. The culmination of my personal war against the silence took place not in a grand confrontation, but in the grime and shadows of the Annex C loading dock in the cold, pre-dawn hours. My lair wasn't a command center. It was the space behind a large, foul-smelling dumpster where I huddled for what felt like an eternity, waiting. The entity's true form, I realized, wasn't a creature of light or a being of flesh. It was an idea, a parasitic language, and its physical presence in my world was condensed into that one single reel of magnetic tape at the bottom of a trash can. The confrontation was a battle of patience and nerve. I watched as the night gave way to the first faint gray light of dawn. I saw the morning shift arrive, their faces sleepy and mundane, utterly oblivious to the cosmic stakes being played out just feet away from them. Finally, the cleaning crew, two old men moving with the slow, deliberate pace of those who have seen too many dawns, wheeled the trash receptacles out onto the dock. My heart pounded. This was it. The final revelation didn't come from a flash of insight, but from a moment of pure, dumb luck that felt like a cosmic joke. As one of the cleaners heaved my target bin towards the compactor truck, he slipped on a patch of oil. The can tipped, spilling a wave of paper and refuse across the concrete. And there, rolling out from the mess, was the small, square box. My box. The cleaner cursed, kicking at the debris. He was about to sweep it all into a pile when the truck driver, impatient, honked his horn. The cleaner, giving up, simply nudged the biggest pieces of trash back into the can with his foot, leaving the rest, including my tape, scattered on the ground. He righted the bin, emptied it, and the truck drove away. I waited for an agonizing 10 minutes until the loading dock was deserted again. Then I moved. I walked out from behind the dumpster, my heart in my throat, and picked up the tape. It was grimy, but intact. I slipped it inside my coat. The final act was my escape. I didn't go back inside. I walked away from Annex C, away from the manicured lawns and the brutalist architecture, and I didn't look back. I got in my car and drove, with no destination in mind, just away. I drove for 2 days, fueled by coffee and adrenaline, the tape a hot radioactive presence on the passenger seat next to me. My sacrificial plan wasn't to overload a reactor or trigger a self-destruct. It was quieter, and in its own way, more total. I was going to destroy Arthur Thompson, the promising young CIA analyst. I was going to erase myself. In a dusty motel room in a nameless town in Ohio, I made my preparations. I withdrew all the cash from my bank account. I abandoned my car. I bought a bus ticket to a city I'd never been to. And I mailed the tape, wrapped in a dozen layers of newspaper and placed in a plain cardboard box, to a post office box I had rented under a false name a state away. I would not carry it with me. It was too dangerous. It was a homing beacon. My plan was to disappear, to live a quiet, anonymous life, and to keep the tape, my single piece of proof, safe and hidden until the time was right. Until I was old, and the men who hunted me were dead or retired. Until the world was, perhaps, ready to hear it. As I dropped the box into the mailbox, a wave of profound finality washed over me. It was done. I was a ghost. A man who had willingly stepped out of his own life. The world I knew, the future I had planned, was gone. Sacrificed for this one, single, stolen echo of a truth too vast to comprehend. I turned from the mailbox and walked into the anonymous crowds of my new life. The silence I had fought against had now become my only shield, and as I walked, I felt a strange, terrifying lightness. The weight of the secret was gone, but so was everything else. The tape was safe, but Arthur Thompson was dead. The silence and the static swallowed me whole. I didn't wake up to the beeping of a heart monitor. but to something far more disorienting. The deafening silence of a life without purpose. The decades that followed my disappearance were a long, gray epilogue. I drifted. I took on new names, worked menial jobs, and learned to live with the constant, low-grade hum of paranoia. I became a ghost, haunting the edges of my own country. My past, a carefully guarded secret that festered inside me like a tumor. I never went back for the tape. The fear was too great. Sterling and the men like him had long arms and longer memories. I told myself I was waiting for the right time. But the truth is, I was a coward. I had stolen the fire, but I was too afraid to use it. I was found not by a cleanup crew, but by the slow, inexorable march of time. I grew old. My body began to fail, and the weight of my silence became heavier than any government threat. The debriefing, when it finally came, was not in a sterile room with men in black. It happened in my own mind every single night for 50 years. It was a relentless interrogation of my own choices, my own cowardice. The Catalyst, that podcast that quoted my lie back to me, was the final straw. It made me realize that my silence hadn't protected the world. It had only protected the lie. It was time to finish what I had started. I finally retrieved the tape from that dusty post office box, half expecting it to be empty. But it was there, a relic from another lifetime. I bought the reel-to-reel player, the microphone. I set up my small makeshift studio, and I recorded my story, the whole thing. I poured 50 years of silence and fear and guilt into a single digital file. I knew what would happen the moment I uploaded it. They would be listening. They are always listening. And so, my story now comes to its true end. I have finished my recording. The file is uploading as I speak, a slow, steady progress bar crawling across my screen. It's a lifeline to the world, a final, desperate message in a bottle. The car pulled up about 10 minutes ago, a black sedan, just like in the movies. It's parked at the end of my long gravel driveway, its engine off. 2 men in dark conservative suits got out. They are not rushing. They are walking towards my house with the unhurried calm of men who know they have already won. They are not here to harm me. They are not here to threaten me. They are here to offer me a new kind of silence. A comfortable one, a managed one. They will take down the video, of course. They will release a story about a senile old man, a former low-level clerk with a history of delusions. They will erase my truth with a more convenient one. They will offer me a quiet, comfortable place to live out my final days, a place with soft beds and good food and no internet connection. A gilded cage. I look at the screen. The upload is almost complete. 98%. 99%. The footsteps are on my porch now. I'm not afraid anymore. My sacrifice was not in disappearing 50 years ago. My sacrifice is now in knowing that my story will be heard by only a few before it is erased. In knowing that I will trade my freedom for the slim, desperate hope that the echo of my voice, the truth about the symbol and the hum, will find a home in one of you. That the virus of the truth will, for once, be stronger than the virus of the lie. The doorbell rings. 100%. Upload complete. They gave me a new name, a new life, and told me to forget. But I won't. Because sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet and the world is asleep, I still put on the headphones and listen to the tape. And I know they were wrong about one thing. It wasn't a language. It was an invitation. And it's still waiting for an answer. So that's the story of Arthur Thompson. A story that proves the most terrifying conspiracies aren't hatched in smoke-filled rooms by evil men, but in brightly lit, sterile offices by bureaucrats who genuinely believe they're protecting us. It's a story about how the ambition to control a narrative can become a horror story all its own. Officially, Project Blue Book found nothing. But you and I both know the truth now. They didn't find nothing. They found something so profound, so reality-shattering that the only response was to burn the books and pretend the library never existed. Thank you for watching until the very end. If this story made you think or look over your shoulder, support the channel with a like and subscribe. And be sure to share your thoughts in the comments below. Until next time, be careful what you listen for in the static. Sometimes it isn't just interference. Sometimes it's the universe trying to change the channel.